Hey, I'm Scott.
And I'm Chris.
And this is Doxalogic, where we help you think with your Bible.
Next question. How should Christians feel about illegal immigration?
Well, first and foremost, the word illegal ought to tell you a lot about how we should feel about it. This is it's a complicated, somewhat subject, and it definitely has a lot of sensitivity around it. But if we could just understand it without like the faces of all the people and just say biblically on a philosophical level about governing authorities, illegal immigration should not be allowed to stand. You should protect your nation from illegal immigration, and you should, in a just way, you should send out those who have illegally entered. They've already committed a crime. So there's one sense in which you don't wait for the person to commit a crime on your land. They've already committed a crime by entering your land illegally. Now, where it becomes difficult in the sense of, man, people are fleeing awful situations. People are fleeing governmental tyranny. They're fleeing just wild and rampant gang, infestation in their own nation. You can name many South American nations, drugs, and so the emotional side comes in very quickly when there's all the faces and all the reasons of why people are seeking this, and yet the word illegal immigration, the word illegal ought to settle it for you, that you should not be as a Christian in favor of illegal immigration. Not the flip side, but to say one more thing is to say we ought to have a political philosophy that has a robust, large, kind of a large-hearted way to legally bring in immigrants. Like you should be very, very for those who want to come in legally. And so this isn't about like don't let people in. This is about there is a law of the land, and you've literally transgressed it. That's my opening salvo. There's more to be said for sure, but I think we have to be able to answer it clearly before we then admit some of the difficult realities of why people are seeking to do what they're doing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it's interesting that I'm thinking of loving your neighbor and just how you gave two positions that are two ways of how you love your neighbor. Love your neighbor by protecting and preserving the constituents within a nation, right? That have, that you would want to protect from those who are immigrating and don't have good intentions, for example, but beyond the idea of not the illegal side, but then also the loving your neighbor of like because I think the other side of this is the refugee side, right? Like how can you take in and how can you care for those that are in really bad situations? And it seems like there's not just one side. Like this is what it means to love your neighbor is just take them all in, right? That there's consequences to that. Yep. That we have to be careful that we don't just on feels and on a sense of, this is what love would do. Well, hang on a second, because the implications down the road is that actually does harm to a neighbor in some way. And so it can't mean that all the way. And that this is more complicated than just, bring everybody in, right? Open the door so far. Like, why not make it just legal, Chris? Why not just not even have an entry system? Just make it totally legal and everyone can come flooding in. Well, hang on a second. There's wisdom as to why that takes place as well.
I know there are limits to how far you want to push this analogy, or how anyone would want to push this analogy, but if you could liken it to a family and the irresponsible mom and dad adopting 17 children, they have 2 or 3 biological and they adopt 17 children. You are hating your biological children, assuming that's irresponsible. You don't have the means, you don't have the home, you cannot take care of now all of them. You can't take care of all of them. You could adopt 1 or 2 responsibly to the glory of God and bring them into your family and love your biological children and the new children you've adopted. And I know I don't want to push the analogy too far, but to say, to let millions, as has been done, let's be honest, well before it was Biden, but especially right now, 7 or so million and counting every day, you are hating. This is my point. You are not loving your neighbor, the neighbor literally among you in your nation, by just irresponsibly bringing in way more people. And you're actually not loving those people either, because the amount of the devastation that gets brought in their lives. Sometimes they're believing a flat out lie about what's going to be given to them, what's going to be afforded to them. They're going to be literally bused and flown into the interior of the country and live in destitute poverty. Many of them, and that's not loving either. And again, it's the illegal side that should settle it from the beginning. But not the idea of a broad, generous, legal immigration policy. We should be for that. So there is a dance here and a tension, but again, I would say the question is easy from the illegal side of it.
Yeah.
And I think you were making a specific point, but just want to make sure we're clear. You're not saying that every situation in which someone adopts 17 people is wrong outright.
Yeah, it's not
your
impossible.
Your point wasn't that. Your point was simply saying there's not been a consideration of means. There's not been a consideration of how you're going to care for them, where you're going to place them, what you're going to, that. I think that was your scenario, right?
Starting with the irresponsible mom and dad who do that. They have not counted the cost. They do not understand what it's going to take, and they are going to make shipwreck of their family life. And I'm just making an analogy to what's happening in our nation to say that type of irresponsibility is we cannot love the people we're bringing in, and we are not loving the people that are already in our nation. And so that's, again, the analogy may be imperfect, but I think it's important nonetheless.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
You've been listening to Doxalogic, a podcast by Doxa Church in Rockland, California. To learn more, visit us online at doxa.church.